Welcome to Love Gladiator, a podcast devoted to spiritual awakening, surrender, and healing. If you are currently in a deep transformational process or experiencing a spiritual awakening, you are at the right place. Get ready to meet transformational teachers who will share their extraordinary journeys in surrendering to their soul's mission to become the medicine and mentor they are today. Now, here's your host, transformational guide and business coach, David Vox.
Welcome to another episode of the Love Gladiator podcast. Hello, Gladiator. I'm so happy that you're here with me today because you are going to meet one of my dear friends and coaches, Patti M. She is a Book Alchemist extraordinaire, but she is also an author of her own memoir, Loving Large. And if you are birthing a big story inside of you that you want to serve the world with, or maybe you're scared to share your story in public, maybe you have shame around your story, and please know this episode is for you. I know how you feel because this was one of my biggest fear in my life, and then one day I had to stand up in front of 170 other people in my industry and share my story, and it was such an healing experience. And throughout my journey, I shared so many vulnerable pieces on my social media, but in a safe, sacred circle. And it has been so transformational to hear the people that come to me and say, because of you, I went home to my family and told about the abuse. Because of you, I could open up this and start to heal. The ripple effect when we let our stories shine and serve is absolutely incredible. So, if you're ready for this extremely beautiful and deep episode, without further ado, this is my friend Patti M. Patti, welcome to the Love Gladiator podcast. It's such an honor to have you here.
Isn't this exciting?
This is going to be quite a ride. Can you tell us a little bit about who you are? Because there is this common denominator with everyone that I know in the industry, and that is that they write a book, they work with you, and they all will say, you have to meet Patti. So tell us, who is Patti?
Wow. Well, the who on the industry side is I'm the coach behind the writers. So everything from you want to write a book and you don't know how to turn your ideas into a book. You have this wonderful coaching program that you run and you want to turn it into sort of a message for the greater audience. I'm that book wizard that takes a story, whether that's a memoir like yours, or your guests will remember Addison Brazil's, or many others that I know you're going to have on your podcast, whether it's a memoir or it is this combination of a bit of your life, as well as what you put out in the world. And those are sort of my specialty books. And I stay with authors as long as they need me, because sometimes, as you know, it involves pulling the story. Then we percolate on what the real story is and what those threads are and what readers might want. And sometimes that takes us back to childhood. It takes us months of figuring out what the story really is. So I call myself the Book Alchemist these days, because it really is whatever you bring to me, I'll help you turn it into a book in whatever form that is. And for some people that's self-publishing, for some people that is, the big 5 publishers in the US or all over the world. So I'm the behind the curtain person.
And when you're not behind the curtain, who are you then?
So mom of a really old kids who are in their late 20s now. Fierce lover of animals. Crazy clothes. Flora and fauna, and book obsessed. I am book obsessed. My whole world revolves around words, and that's probably who I am, to be fair, is to say that it all revolves around words and communication for me. Maybe you should say who you think I am. You get a different view of me across the desk.
I do know that you are also an author as well. So
it's true.
What does Loving Large mean to you, and what was the journey with your book?
Yeah, Loving Large, my memoir, came out just at the beginning of COVID in April of 2020. So I wrote the memoir over 10 years. It's the story of my son and I, but I would say mostly myself, navigating the rare disease world when my son was diagnosed with an uber rare disease at 16, and I had to find him doctors, people that understood the disease, become his advocate, his champion, his cheerleader, his comforter, all the things that someone who's coping with a diagnosis needs. But he was 16 and his disease, so very little was known about it and still is. And so very little was known about how it might manifest in him that it became all consuming. So it's Loving Large is a story of how to love that big that you give your life over to something, especially a child. But it's also the story of having a heart so big that it won't stop advocating for someone you love. So I go deep on throwing myself over in order to get him what he needed. And ultimately the title works in all of those ways. You know, the different ways you might understand Loving Large seems to apply, and I'm proud to love large. As you know, I attach for life in every way that a wolf and a dog would, but this was the ultimate test of my heart. So the memoir, Loving Large, is born of figuring out what it meant about me, and ultimately, who was I going to be after I stopped being all the things that my son needed me to be. And that's the piece of life I'm living now.
Beautiful. Going through your own process, because coaching others and guiding them to be published authors is a very different game than writing a personal memoir about your own child and your own journey going through something extremely dramatic. How was that process for you?
Well, I learned everything about coaching by not being able to coach myself. I had a coach with me through the 8 years of I wrote it and then I rewrote it, I agented it and then I re-agented it, and I could not coach myself. So if I'd been able to laugh at the time, the irony would have been just gut-splittingly funny, because I would get stuck on things and I'd say to my coach, the incredible Betsy Rappaport, I'd say, like, I can't write about this. How am I going to write about my personal life? What if I say something that offends people? How am I going to find words for this? All the things that my clients and I wrestle to the ground every day. I couldn't see in the mirror how funny it was that I could take people down this path, but I couldn't take myself there. So I have ever more appreciation for what I get to do every day because I did it myself. And, you know, I had to take my children into that space with me. And that added a level of complexity and a consciousness about my writing that I thought was going to take away how good it might be. Because I thought first of all, you often get concerned about what the audience is thinking and who your reader is going to be. But I knew my kids were going to see how I spoke about them, their father, how we navigated those years. It wasn't just the disease. We navigated divorce together. We navigated my father's death together. And I wondered what it would sound like to them. So I was very, very self-conscious writing. And I think that's what I learned most is writers can't escape the self-consciousness.
I feel that everyone that I meet in our industry, they're carrying this story that can serve the world. And I know that is going to be an upcoming book of yours. I'm just pushing you out there.
Right. That's right.
And you are sort of the doula of those big stories that are here to serve. And I see so many people when they come out and they forget the shame and the challenges they have with sharing their story, it serves in such a multidimensional way. There are so many people that are inspired when we dare to step out with our story and our experiences. Why do you think it's so hard for people to bring it to that level where they get to share their story?
Well, to build on self-consciousness, part of it is that. But self-consciousness is just the outward expression of fear. So the fear is they won't like it. The fear is it's not good enough. The fear is I'm the only one that ever felt this. The fear is they'll laugh at me, shame, fear, and everything that we unfortunately learn after childhood, you know, when our inhibitions start to take us over. The fear is always the preemptive strike, but how it manifests for people is in all of these I can'ts, because we have so much to compare it to. You know, I like to talk about how I don't know when writing stopped being an art. Maybe because communication has become so central to human connection, and so it should be. But maybe it's that we've in some way blown up communication, that we've electrified it and electronicized it, if that's a word, because we've stopped seeing the art in communication. I think if folks could go back to just tell your story as if you're around the campfire, just share it because On its own, it's a lesson for all of us to the point of connection. The hardest part is that we lose what the story serves, which is my next book, Writing Books That Serve. We lose the power in just sharing, because we don't have to tell people what to do with it. We don't have to share a piece of our history and then say, by the way, as in the case of my book, love your children better because each day is a gift. I didn't need to say that in the book. Sharing the story makes people go and hug their children more, makes people more aware when their kid has a strange symptom, makes each of us more aware of our fragility. The hard part is we forget that that's this deep human connection of storytelling is what we forget is in service to each other. Just put the story out there. What other people choose to do with it is their business. That if we could keep that in mind while we're writing, I don't know that the actual writing would be easier, but I do feel like that idea of what your book serves would be clearer, and that would drive you, because we all need a driver in those long days at the computer.
Absolutely. What do you feel when you've been going through this process for yourself, but also with clients? What do you see the greatest surrender is in this process when they are putting together a story that is going to go out in public?
You don't get to decide. The book decides. So the greatest surrender is you're going down a path that you can try to manage. We can control a table of contents, but I only control it as a piece of architecture would, because then comes the alchemy part. The book will decide, the universe will decide. Our brains are these powerful organisms that connects our ideas and feelings and thoughts like a bowl of fish hooks. You don't know which fish hook is going to grab the next one. So you know you're putting a book out into the world, but I always say, please suspend your disbelief, because the book will not be what you imagined it to be. And I spend a lot of time hearing exactly where my clients are and where I've been, and then realize we'll probably throw that all out tomorrow. Because there's an inner driver in a book, in a story, in a tale, and the book itself is this enclosed space that we can't capture all the content we want to. So we start making choices. And the second you make choices, pieces get dropped. The story changes. You lose control, and you have to give up control for where the story is going. Anyone who comes to me and says, we're only going to talk about this, we're not going to go into that part of my story, I always know that they're bracing themselves for the ultimate surrender, which is whatever rises to the top is what we're going to tell. And you know this very well from working with me.
Yes.
Because the light goes on, doesn't it, at some point? And I'll say, no, that's the story. That's the thing. That right there is the thing. And we don't ever know what that's going to be. We can't predict. We just can't predict. So the surrender is to the art.
It's really interesting because when I started working with you, I didn't know that writing a book would be such a transformational process. I feel on the same level as ayahuasca and other things, that you can work with a teacher because the book becomes a teacher, a very powerful reflection, and to be witnessed by someone like yourself that can ask questions that you haven't really looked at, to look at your story from many different perspectives and different angles. It becomes such a powerful tool to not only be able to sort of look at your story from, maybe not that same emotional intensity, but also get all the lessons and the juice out of your own story. I feel that this process is something that every human being should go through, to have every part of your story witnessed, to write down every single part of your story. If you're not journaling every day, then you need to get started. And also to have someone like you or a program where you can go through the process, even if you're not going to publish a book. The power of your story, when you remove the shame and the hiding, it is transformational around any camper around the world. What do you say to the people that are holding a super powerful story inside of them that they feel they want to share with the world?
Wow, that's a fantastic question. And I love that word witness, because it implies the sharing of it in a safe space. And that is more than anything why I suggest to everyone, why would you try to do this alone? Why? Because in doing it alone, you bear witness to the story on repeat, but you've already been doing that. You haven't had objective eyes, and you haven't had subjective loving care, which is really what you need. I always suggest that people just spend time connecting with a coach, a writing partner, an editor, because what it is it's a bond for life. And I've certainly had this conversation with you. It will always take longer than you want, is the first thing I say. And I laugh about this because I can't tell you how many times I called my coach and said, what, we're going to rewrite this again? How many more years am I going to write it? And I recall so clearly her saying it takes as long as it takes. So that's the first thing I'd say. The other thing is you don't know what your story has to give to the world until you put it into someone's hands who lives in that space. And that's where I live. I live in the space between the writer's intention and the reader's desire. And in that space is where we decide what will work for both of you. And ultimately, it is this compromise. No one writes a book without ultimately having to think about what the reader wants. And no writer ever gets to just put out in the world and not care if it's ever seen. Because even any writer I've met, even those who said, I don't care how many people see my book, and I certainly felt that way, I did want someone to see it because I knew there was someone. I knew there was probably another mother out there. And as soon as I heard that it touched one person, that the story reached one person, that it made them laugh and it made them cry and it made them look at the hospital differently, that's what I would say to people is you don't know the impact your book can have. And that's why having a teammate is ultimately a necessity, I think.
But what I feel that you are naturally doing with any client, because I actually had to go for advice with ayahuasca because I've been trying to write a book for over 10 years. Probably was getting closer to 20. And ayahuasca said, you don't have to relive all of this trauma all by yourself. This is a way of self-sabotaging yourself and sitting there in all the details. You need a witness. You need someone to do this with you, for you. You need a team. You need to be supported and held and seen in a way you weren't in your childhood. And I feel this must be so important, even if you are not planning to write a book. So many people are still sitting there with a story that is untold, unseen, unwitnessed, unvalidated, and therefore also unloved. And I feel the process that we do together should be around every campfire around the world. It is so important and transformational.
Oh, it's beautiful. And thank you for saying it. You know, we can't understand what it's going to unearth. We think we're so smart as humans, right? We think we really have an idea. You know, we're so cocky going in. And lately I've been calling myself the Irreverent book coach. I've been saying I'm so irreverent. You know, I'll teach workshops and I'll say to people like, there's not going to be a template. It's not going to look the way you want. Go ahead and design a lovely cover, bless you, but that's not the way it will turn out. And I believe I've said it recently in a workshop. I said, you're not going to be the same because the book takes a piece of you, changes it, and puts it out in the world. For that one moment, the day that book publishes, that's who you have become. And then you're never that. The river flows over you, under you, and around you, and you change with it. Lots of people, and I love to tell people this when I meet them for the first time, is that remember you're living while you're writing this book. So what ends up happening is content evolves as you're living it. You suddenly have an epiphany. You suddenly have an experience. You suddenly engage ayahuasca in a dialogue about how to do this. And ultimately, the book has changed. And that can mean exactly as you said, you don't have to relive your trauma. You selectively create a story of it to the extent that a reader can take what they need from it. And that's where the service element comes from. And I think as soon as we shift writing to see it both as art and service, we change this idea that something's being demanded of us. I think we're conditioned to think that there's an expectation, and the only expectation is within. No one wants to read the same book someone else wrote. You're the one that thinks you need to write the book someone else wrote. As soon as we can get rid of some of that, and it is surrender, it's also trusting someone and trusting that other person that you're writing it with. And all of that to say that some people do, as you have, write and write and write and create content that's always in service of the next draft. You were going to have to write that anyway. And that unearthed it to the point where you had the confidence of knowing that you had enough content and enough endurance in you that you could do this one more time with me. And it is endurance, isn't it?
It is. It takes a lot of time. But what I see more and more from my own process working with you, but from every person that is working with you, from every person that I'm coaching myself, the moment someone stands in their truth and shares their story in a book or on a Facebook post or on Instagram, as long as they have been able to digest it and shared it in a safe and sacred space first, it's maybe the most transformational journey that they can do as human beings. Why do you think that is? Like, just sharing our story,
I know,
becomes this mega rite of passage.
You know, there's something about standing naked at the edge of a cliff, isn't there? There's something about standing on the horizon saying, okay, have a look at me now because I've put this all out there for better or for worse. And I think there's this wonderful thing that happens when you write something book length, but I do see it happen with these gorgeous, well edited and composed Facebook posts, is that you got to the destination of making your point. And you say to yourself, you know what, that's pretty good. And when you get to the I made my point, you have the confidence for however long to say, I'm going to stand on this mountain. I'm going to stand on this edge. And for however long that lasts, that is ultimately standing in our truth, for better or for worse, saying, I believed it. I wrote it the best I could. And for me, that is the biggest thing. And that one moment, you did the best you could. That's what you believed then and there. And that brazen, this is who I amness, however long it lasts, I think that's what all art is about as a self-expression.
So beautiful. And where do you think it comes in with the shame and the guilt and all of the yuck that they carry with their stories? Because I see everyone slowly but surely getting liberated by so much of this old stuff in the process of sharing and owning their story, no matter what perspective and format they're sharing it. That pain turns into power and purpose, even though that's a cliche. It actually happens.
You know, it'd be great to consider multiple of these journeys that I've been honored to go on. And I may do this in my next book, where someone starts out saying, I want my book to do this. This is what it looks like. And those are external values. Those are extrinsic measures. We all have them. And this is what gets imposed upon us from, probably once we're not infants, is this extrinsic evaluation of ourselves, whether that's by comparison, society, community, family, whatever that is. But by the time you've spent the number of hours alone in your head that writing a book requires, the internal validation is the reward. You have to know you believe it, or you can't leave it alone. There's this function in editing and revising where you pick at the words, you choose the phrases. That's not quite it. That doesn't sound like me. This isn't quite it. And then the reward of the confidence that comes from completion, I think, helps us own the transformation and stand in the truth. It's so hard to get something huge completed, isn't it? I mean, I liken it to building a house because it's just like that. A 250-page book like Loving Large, countless hours, 50 revisions. I wrote the whole thing twice, and then I overwrote it twice and cut it down to 60,000 words for the publisher. That process meant I had to be in love with it for that one moment in time when I said, this is done, this is the best I can do. And that, I think, is how we stand in our truth. The completion brings the confidence and the internal validation to say, better or for worse, this is who I am right now.
And who do you see people become after they're done with a process like this?
I almost always say kindness. We're so much kinder to ourselves after. I can speak to my own memoir here. I don't think I gained self-appreciation, but that's just me. But I gained kindness. I gained this deep patience with myself that calmed me down. I was thinking I should have done everything differently. Time that I might have used the word waste before. I might have said, I lost so much time in those 10 years. But someone close to me asked near the end of the book, would you do it differently? What are you going back there for? What are you reliving all that for? The answer is because I can, and I can survive it better this time. And this is what made me who I am. So it is stepping into your own skin We don't have to feel the pain again. We can look at it through an artistic lens. We can look at it through a writer's lens. But kindness is what comes of saying, wow, I got through it. You gain a tiny bit of objectivity on yourself, because by the time you're in your third or your 50th or your 190th draft, you're thinking, how does this sound to the reader? What does my editor think? What does my coach say? And you get the eyes of someone who really knows the story, and they see you. And being seen ultimately is why we put art out into the world. And books are no different. I hope that answers some of the question. It isn't easy. And my Irreverent book coach says this all the time. Like, if you want a template, you're not going to get one. If you're looking for an easy way, you should try some other kind of art. I don't think there is another art that anyone would call easy. So if I told you it was going to be tough, would you do it anyway? Yes, if I can show you how it would serve the world, one person, one reader at a time.
I feel when I work with someone in the healing space, therapeutic space, shamanic space, coaching space, this is kind of ironic. I judge them from how quickly they judge me. So what I feel with you is that you can go to this immense depth without any level of judgment, but with a lot of compassion. And that is where I see someone's depth and professionalism in this space, that you can talk about the dark night of the soul and abuse or personal shame that you have done, cheating or drugs or whatever it is. And there is no judgment. There is always this lens of compassion and witnessing and understanding. It doesn't have to agree, but there is no level of judgment. Where did you find that in yourself? Because that, I feel, is one of your superpowers.
Oh, that's kind. I have a deep curiosity. I would think an unwavering curiosity about other people. I also learned really quickly that I could consume more stories if I didn't internalize them. So my being able to unconditionally savor this union that I have with writers while I work with them is that I don't take it home with me. I cannot take it home with me. So I don't allow myself to compare. I don't allow myself to sit with myself as a mom, myself as a wife, myself as a lover or a friend, or any of those other roles in my life. I completely absorb into the story to my own detriment, because I go deep and I stay in it for a long time, but it's always worth that. I don't know where the lack of judgment comes from. It's an honor to know that that's true. That's true for you. There's an alchemical bit here again, which is I'm always trying to turn it into something else. I'm always trying to hear it, let it pass through, hold it, and seeing what can I turn it into in truly the alchemical way. So your pain, although agonizing for me to spend time with you in your pain, I immediately try to transform it into a way to convey it that others can gain from hearing your truth. So in that process of trying to transform, I think I busy myself with the selfless task of how to get this to someone else's eyes. I've never understood the lack of judgment. I mean, I think my heart is just as big as the world, but so is my appreciation for the human condition. And there isn't a mistake I haven't made. Having been a writer myself, my whole life helps immensely. I don't know that I could coach as deeply as I do if I hadn't written Loving Large and been part of so many books. But I don't know if maybe it's about me giving writers something I haven't had enough of in my own life. Part of it is that, but the other piece is I learned to do this through other coaches that held space for me while I found myself in the last decade. And that was modeled for me. All of those might be ways of my sneakily trying to get out of saying something nice about myself, but...
Yeah, I was just going to point towards that, but you saw it yourself. Oh, this is so funny. Do you feel that after having so much view out into the world and the details and the stories on so many people, are you able to see yourself?
Only if I choose. And that's how I can keep doing what I do as well as I do. I have to take very sparing moments to look at how it has changed me. Because each book and each story and each person does change me, and I do bond for life. And what I know to be true is that if I can support it, if I can help tell it, that's where my meaning comes from. I learned maybe a decade, maybe 15 years ago, that giving voice to people was what I was on the planet for. And I started to see that it had these ramifications in other pieces of my life. I went into politics really early. I was obsessed with politics because this idea that people that can't speak for themselves can be represented in an electorate. I was literally active in politics from the time I was about 10 and stayed active in it through many career iterations. So voice has always mattered to me. And it isn't the people that can't speak for themselves. It's the ones that won't, that I think need an advocate for them. And I feel like every one of my clients is a won't when they arrive. I don't know if I can. They might come with a should. Somebody suggested they should. Oh, maybe you should just talk to Patti. And it's somewhere in that, it starts to feel a little easier to try. And writing is always a try, like art is always a try, right? There's no final draft. So if we can get from a won't, I will not use my voice. I will not put my yodel out into the world. If we can get from that to, okay, that's what I have to say right now. That's a long stretch of self-validation. And that's the transformation that I think books do.
I love that. And I had someone reach out to me that wanted to write a book. And I didn't refer to you, Patti, because I could really see that she wasn't ready. It was a very, very intense story. And I asked her, have you ever shared anything from this story with anyone before? And she hadn't gone through that process yet. And I said, when I started this process, I was shaking and crying in a closed room at a safe retreat. And then eventually I stood in an audience with 170 other coaches, still crying and shaking and completely a mess. Probably people were worried about me. But I knew that I had to go through that process to own it internally and externally before I could even go to the to the next step of putting it together in a book.
It's true. Yeah, and I don't know what this readiness is. You know, we're all on this continuum of readiness all the time. I don't always know when someone's ready, but I always know when they're ready to try. And in the try is where we start. And I think we're always in the try until the track is laid, as I say, and it's got legs, and we're starting to fatten up the skeleton of the book. Until then, it's always a try, and we all stop trying. All of my clients leave the process. All of my clients leave the time we have together and say, like, I just can't anymore. And then 48 hours later, they're back on, or 2 months later, they're back on because of the strain of trying so much. And if we think about it, it's that exertion of trying something that we don't know we can do. That is where we expend the most energy. And here's writing, and writing nonfiction. You're writing your truth, you're writing your message, you're writing these mantras about what your message in the world is. Can you imagine how important this feels to us? This is our life's work coming out one word at a time. So the amount of intense, energetic effort is, I don't know anything that compares to it. And writing nonfiction is so specific because the only way out is in. You've got to go in to get through it. And it's one more day. It's one more day on a Zoom call with me. It's one more day, across the desk for me. And I find a way for writers to keep on going even when they don't think they can. This is the art of the coaching.
How do you think the world would be if everyone who say I can't or I won't found that story inside themselves that they knew could serve maybe their local community, maybe their family, or maybe an entire generation?
We'd be far better connected. I mean, I think it's the loss of the so-called civilizing centuries. What we've lost from being a storytelling culture is we've lost connection, and we've lost speaking to one another with no purpose except to share. We do this thing in the street or, online. How you doing? I've been thinking about you. How you doing? No one really means it. But what if I said to you, David, you will not believe what happened today. And then you say, yeah, I've got time. I want to hear. And it's, a story about my dog or something that happened with a neighbor or a coincidence that I thought was a coincidence. You'll take that with you. You'll feel touched, you'll feel seen, you'll feel shared, connection made, connection extended. And we don't have to do it often. And this is, I think, the service of books too, is that we can pick them up and put them down. It is like connecting with an old friend on a deeper conversational level than a, hey, how you doing? What I think the world would be like if we had more campfires is a knowingness of our own belonging, that comfort of our own belonging, and to think how much less anxiety there would be if we all knew we belonged around 20 or 30 or 100 campfires.
Or just one.
Just one. And it doesn't matter the number of people or the who, but the knowledge that we can belong simply by giving that little tiny seed of ourselves. You don't have to relive the pain to connect with someone else. That's the fallacy of writing nonfiction. It's not about completely reanimating the experiences of your childhood. Nothing about book writing involves that or requires that.
And when it comes to sharing your story around the campfire and bringing this seed out, do you feel that this is actually what every word of communication is truly about? Every story is searching for belonging. That story is searching for a belonging. That seed is looking for the soil to be planted. That person is looking for its tribe.
That's beautiful, David. I hadn't thought of it that way, but these are energetic threads, aren't they? These stories, they are never just about the details. I mean, my story, if I told you about my dog, is really about me wanting to share with you, because I know you'll think any story I tell you about my dog is hilarious, but also that this is something that we feel in our DNA, you and I. We share this. This is a David and Patti thing. I love that you said that, because I've been toying with this idea of, has the over-focus on communication, mostly on our phones, has that diminished the appreciation of the art of printed communication? Are we not consuming words in the same way? And the long and short of it is that communication is everything. And that reaching one reader is the only reason we write. It was why we had cave drawings. It's why we told stories. It's why myths exist, was to transmit knowledge, but also to make the connection to humans. It's why we know our history. We wouldn't know our history if that wasn't true. And I think that energetic link is why we talk at all. Because if you think about it, there's not a lot of reason to talk, except to say, like, pass the potatoes or something.
Yeah, and it feels like it when you're actually sharing your story, or if I, for example, make a social media post that I feel is very, very personal, and I think, okay, my life is over after this one and nobody's going to hire me. And then I share a post about my mom being imprisoned for murder, or whatever it is, something deep, something personal for me that I've been hiding. It's almost like that story somehow is searching to connect with that one person as much as that person is searching for that story. And probably the same for books as well, and reader. It's like they're both longing each other for the same belonging.
That's beautiful. There's an interface, isn't there? There's the reader will find you. Whoever is meant to read your book will find you. I have nothing but faith in that. If you tell the truth. And the level of depth that you decide to go to has to be just in the bloodletting phase. So, I mean, and all joking aside, we don't want to pick up a book that says, let's use mine for example. I think on the back it says something about, my life was pitched into the abyss after my son was diagnosed with an uber rare disease. Well, you don't pick that book up and then I don't talk about how messed up I got. It says right there, you pick up a book with the expectation of something that's within it. It's this hopefulness, this desire of what might be in the book. And that two-way street of please give me what I think I'm going to find, but surprise me and entertain me as well. That's a constant exchange, I think, in reading. And ultimately, there's a listener for every story, isn't there? And there's a teller for every story. And all books do is lay it out in long form with a lot of patience and finesse.
Same as for this podcast.
Right?
Patti, this is so beautiful, and I love the campfire, and I can't wait for your new book because I know how powerful your teachings and your methods and your ideas are. Where can people find some more information about you and also the book you have written and the ones you will?
So everything about me is at pattimhall.com. M is for memoir. Everything is there. The book is available everywhere. Loving Large is on every major book service, and your bookstore can get it. It's still widely published around the world. Thanks to COVID, the books that came out in 2020, I think, will stay in publication a lot longer because people are finding them. And I'm all over social media on Patti M. Hall right now. I'm just starting to talk about my next book, tentatively titled Writing Books That Serve. And I may have a few vignettes in there about superstar writers like you who patiently go through the long process and cannot believe how long it takes and cannot believe the steps that you go through and still trust me to keep coming back with me every week. So that's how to find out about me. Or they should just come to you, it sounds like.
Thank you so much, Patti, for sharing.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
Such an honor. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Love Gladiator podcast with Patti M. Hall. And maybe you got inspired to share your own story now. And I just want to remind you, start in a safe and sacred space and take small steps. But I can promise you one thing. There is nothing more transformational than owning your truth, sharing your story, and letting it serve the world. So heart open, head up, and happy surrendering. I'll see you next week.